Hello, I'm Leah Boyd, and I'm a board member with Friends of the Carpinteria Library. And we are delighted to be here today talking to Rodney Chow, who is a fellow Carpinterian and has spent the last 30 years as an apple farmer here in Carpinteria, but had many, many adventures leading him to that point in his life. And we'd love to share some of those with you today and allow him to share lots of his journey with you. Hi, Rodney.
How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your home and for allowing for us to have this conversation with you.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here.
So a little bit later in life, I would say, you decided to become an author. Is that correct?
That's right.
And in the last 5 years, you've published these 2 books.
About 3 years.
Okay, in the last 3 years, wow.
About 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
Right.
And tell us what made you decide, as I recall, it was about at age 90, to sit down with paper and pen and decide to write a book.
Well, actually, I didn't really intend to be an author until I saw all the division that was caused by all the politicians, and there was so much negativity. I hear so much negativity around me that I thought that I would like to write something to counter that negativity and put some positive thinking into everyone's life. And so that's why I started writing the book.
Wonderful. And these are not fictional stories that you've included. They're
No.
stories of your life. And tell us what it is about your childhood and what you've experienced that you feel like has some strong messages for people today.
Well, I would like to also expand on it by saying that I had a real purpose for writing this book, and I used my experience growing up as an example, so that I wouldn't be lecturing anyone. I would show somebody that there is a way we can get along together, and we don't have to be at each other's throat all the time like the politicians are trying to do. And so my first book, what I talked about is that before we pass judgment on anyone, why don't we find out something about them? What is behind their feelings that causes them to act in such a negative way, counter to being a good neighbor, whatever. And it's like a child. Why is a child crying? He's crying because he wants his mother's love. And so that's the answer. And the answer to that is that when you have all these people rioting like that, what is it they want? They want to be part of you. They don't want to be something that's fenced off. But I didn't want to lecture, because I knew that if I lecture, I'll lose my audience. So I use all my experiences growing up in stories to illustrate what I'm trying to say.
So tell us then a little bit about what your childhood was like, so that people who are watching this interview can understand where you were able to develop that idea that you presented here in the book.
Well, I never really gave any thought to that. It's just a purpose that I wanted to.
Sure.
I just felt that someone had to be out there and speak up. And
And you had experiences as a child that involved people of all different ethnicities and backgrounds. Is that
Oh,
correct?
I, that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought up, because I grew up in a neighborhood of second generation people, and there were Asians, Hispanics, and from the Midwest, and we had one thing in common. All of our parents had lost every penny they had in the beginning of the Depression, and and so that was so we had and so we had in the Asians we had the families were well, all our parents were struggling without a penny in their pocket, but and the white folks that we had were from Oklahoma, and they came in, and then the Hispanics at that time were Mexicans. There were any others, and then of course there were the Chinese and the Japanese, and everyone everyone played with each other without any distinction of who was different, because we were all the same. We didn't have television to show us what the wealthier people lived, so there was nothing to make us feel bad. Everybody was poor, and no one felt bad about it because there was no comparison I mean, you were no different than your neighbor, and so we played out in the streets together, and then the children had all the different languages that they mixed together, and of course everyone learned how to swear in each other's languages, and I remember when the comes to dinner time and you could hear a Chinese mother would shout at the children, "Dinner time, pronto, pronto," and that was in Spanish, you see.
Sure.
And so it was very common. We just didn't pay attention to our differences.
So you didn't have much, but you still remember this as a really idyllic childhood, right?
Well, we didn't have anything. We the what we did was we made our own toys, and we used to go rummage into the garages and find the old bamboo rakes that were no good anymore, and we'll cut up the handles and made our own kites, and then our parents would save the tissue paper whenever they had it, and we used that to make our kites.
Wow.
And then we took broken clocks, and we got the spring, and we cut that up, and we made our own pinball machine.
Wow.
And we had a board, and then we took the spring and made little hoops, and then we put numbers on there, and then we took our mother's thread spool, and then put a stick on it and a rubber band, and we put a marble there, and we shot the marble around there like a pinball machine. We made our own pinball machine.
I feel like this is leading very nicely into talking about what your career was, and we don't have to spend very much time talking about it, but
Right.
ultimately you became an engineer, is that right?
Well, the way I became an engineer was it was implanted in my mind by accident. It was, we had, at that time, they were building a storm drain in front of our house. And it was really something exciting for us, something new to see. And all the kids would get out there and watch the people working. And one day my uncle said to me, "What would you like to be?" Well, I kind of worshiped the guy pushing the wheelbarrow. And I really meant I want to be that fellow that's pushing the wheelbarrow. And so he said, "Oh, you want to be an engineer?" And I didn't know what that was, and it stuck with me. I said, well, I'll be an engineer. And so I was about 8 or 9 years old, and that was what I had in my mind on.
Well, it sounds like you had, excuse me, it sounds like you had a mind for it,
Right,
for a few different reasons.
and I'll tell you another thing. My brother, he worshipped at that time. You used to you collect your garbage, and you bring it out to the front, and the city would come along and pick up your garbage. Well, my brother thought the garbage collector was the greatest guy, so he wanted to be a garbage collector.
And is that what he ended up being?
No. Yeah.
I think I should also mention while we're chatting that this neighborhood that you grew up in was in Los Angeles.
Right.
And you spend a little bit of time in the book talking about how it changed over the years and it's a different place today. Do you ever go back to that area? Can you tell us
Yes.
about what's different?
I would like to tell you something about that neighborhood because it's a very unique neighborhood.
Yeah.
It some of the people nowadays they try to call it Chinatown. It wasn't Chinatown. It was a mixture of people from different backgrounds, and the economy was based on the city market on San Pedro Street, and it's only about 2 blocks long, and it started at 9th Street, going down to 10th and halfway down to 12th Street. The entire economy there was cafes, little grocery stores, a drugstore, a seed company, and it was Chinese owned, Japanese owned. There were Filipino barbers. The seed company and an ice cream place was owned by white folks, and so it was what we would call typical early American, and the economy was based on the workers on the city market. The farmers would bring in their produce the night before, and then it started at 3 o'clock in the morning, and by 9 o'clock, all the wholesalers would have bought their produce, and then the workers would come down to the cafes and the restaurants, and that was the economy that kept that neighborhood alive. And so what happened was that, well, let me just go further. And some of the families, they expanded on that because one of the college, what would you call, well, we have a term, you do something at home, you college.
Oh,
whatever.
like a cottage industry, maybe?
Cottage industry,
Yeah.
that's what was. They would get the strawberries from the canneries, and they would pick the green tops off of it, and so that was another way they had an income. So these entrepreneurs, there were 2 families who had the contract, and they would bring in crates and crates of strawberry, and all the wives would come in and earn a few pennies a basket picking up the tops of the, and it was a social affair also.
Sure.
And another way economy they had too was the walnut people. You would bring home sacks and sacks of walnut, and you would shell it, and then you would shell it back for these wholesalers. And so, but then so that was the major economy. When the supermarkets came, they stopped buying from the wholesale produce market, and it died. And when that died, the neighborhood died. But there was also a secondary income from the people in the neighborhood, which was the garment industry. And the garment industry is still there. But the major income was from the produce market.
And your parents played a role in
My
that economy as well.
my parents had the fish market, fish and poultry market.
And they would offer wholesale in the morning, as I understand it. And then how would the day progress for them?
Well, my father started out as a peddler, and he eventually, well, he first he started as a dishwasher, and he earned enough money and got himself a used truck, and then he would go down to Terminal Island in San Pedro, and buy the fish from the fishermen, and then he'll peddle it in the neighborhood. And then he had a corner that he would stop his truck in, and then eventually the poultry shop on the corner was having a hard time surviving, and so they asked my father if he wanted to buy the business. And so my father came home that day and talked to my mother. My mother said, "Buy it." Said, "We will, if you buy it, I will come on and work together with you." So they took that poultry shop and divided it in two, fish on one side and poultry on the other side. So we were the only poultry and fish market in the neighborhood.
Did you eat a lot of poultry and fish?
And, what was that?
Did you eat a lot of poultry and fish at your house?
Yes, and to tell you how poor the neighborhood was, some of my friends thought we were rich because we had fish and chicken to eat, but it was what my father couldn't sell.
Huh.
And so we had more to eat than they did because there were days you didn't sell anything. And my mother told me that when they got to remodeling that store and opened up for business, all they had was $9. That's all they had.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
But I want to tell you something about that I learned about the neighborhood that we can be very proud of. When I was growing up, I thought of everyone as being grown up because I was only about 12 years old, and I was only about 4'8" or something. So, all the adults were people I looked up on, and I thought everybody was just a bunch of old people. But when the war started, so many of them went into the military, and I started to think back. If they went into the military, they were draft age. They were in their early 20s. Those people who started those businesses there with not a penny in their pocket were in their early 20s.
Oh. Wow.
They built the business from nothing.
Hard workers.
Right, and they were only 20, 22, 23 years old.
Jeez.
And so when the war started, they all went into the military, except for the older people who maintained the businesses.
Wow.
But that really took a lot of guts.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
right.
I feel like that also is a good lead into talking about your industrious relatives that came over from China, and you are fifth generation here in the United States.
Right.
So tell us about that first generation. That's quite a story.
Well, the first generation was, he was a young teenager, and he was herding ducks in a village. And the merchant ship that came into Hong Kong needed a cabin boy. And so they kidnapped him and put him on a ship. And so he didn't have a chance to tell his parents that where he was. They just didn't know. And so he was kept as a slave, working as a cabin boy. And so he must have known a little bit of English because of Hong Kong and the British there. And when he reached land on the Oregon coast, he jumped overboard and swam ashore.
To escape.
He swam ashore, and then he lived with the American Indians and he married an American Indian young lady and had a son. And so for a time, I thought I had some American Indian blood in my ancestry. But what happened was that when he made enough money to go back to China, he abandoned that family, went back to China, got a Chinese wife, and had a son. And then when that son was old enough, he sent the son back to America to look for his Indian family, and he couldn't find them. And that son ended up working on the railroads across the Sierra Nevadas, and he was one of the Black Powder group in the town of Colfax, and it's in my book there, and he is quite a story about him because on his free time he panned gold like everybody else, and he found gold, but he didn't recognize it because he was looking for nuggets, and he found gold dust, and so he didn't file his claim, and so a claim jumper came along and forced him off his claim at gunpoint, and then filed a claim on his fine. And right after that, another claim jumper came and killed this fellow and took it from him. So the old family story says, if it didn't happen, that would have been the end of our family.
Right.
He would have been the one that had been killed.
Right.
And
Wow.
And so he ended up being my grandfather's father.
Okay.
And then they ended up in San Francisco, and where my grandfather was a tinsmith, and so that was one branch of the family on my mother's side. So that goes back 5 generations.
Incredible.
On my father's side, I don't know too much about that, except that I learned about this recently when Harris became a vice president, and she was from, I think, Jamaican and Indian, and so I looked it up and found, I never could understand why on my father's side he ended up in Jamaica, because that's the Atlantic Ocean side. Well, what I found out was that when the slaves revolted, they didn't want to work on the plantations anymore. So the British who owned the plantations went to India and Hong Kong and hired the laborers. And that's how the Chinese came over. And so that was on my father's side. And he left Jamaica and made his way across America and ended up in Hawaii. And then my father came back to California and joined the people that spoke his dialect that were no longer, the railroad was completed then. And so all the Chinese became the laborers, and the part of the laborers that built the Sacramento levees were my father's people. And they built the town of Locke, which is still there. And I think it's a California monument now.
And then your family ended up coming down to Los Angeles.
Well, what happened was that the year I was born in 1929, he lost everything. He was a sharecropper on 80 acres of Bartlett Pier. And so according to my folks, during the crash, he had already paid all the pickers, and they sent everything to the commission house, and it was all rejected. They had no buyers. And they sent it back, and it rotted in the fields, and the health department came after them. And by that time, he was left with not a penny in his pocket. So he sent us to our grandparents in San Francisco, and he came down to Los Angeles, became a dishwasher, and got started that way. But the town of Locke is where my father's side is.
Wow.
And that town was, in my opinion, was saved by the hippies, because because as the generations got well educated, they they left the town. They had a college education and they didn't stay there, and so it was only the old folks left there, and the hippies came in during that period, and they kept the old laundries, the old gambling halls, the restaurants, and kept them the same and kept the names the same, and the wood they preserved the town.
Huh. And is that true still today, that the town is?
The town is still there.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have so many interesting
Right. And
family roots.
yeah, so that's my father's side, and then of course my roots is at East Los Angeles.
Yeah. I'm interested in knowing if after a childhood like yours, where you describe everyone as being coming from all these different backgrounds but being the same,
Right.
when you became an adult and were independent and branched out, did you experience any discrimination? Were you surprised by the way that people treat each other differently sometimes?
No, we grew up with that all the time.
Yeah.
And we just got accustomed to it, and you learn how to live with it. And like for instance, we knew there were certain neighborhoods we couldn't walk through, and so we stayed away from there. And we stayed away from places like the beaches, and when we found out that there were places that people would tolerate us, we would go there. So it was more or less a informal. You know, we knew areas we shouldn't go to, but in our neighborhood it was such a hodgepodge of everybody that we didn't have any distinction between, or you were a white person or you were an Asian, or
Yeah.
we all got along together because we were all economically and educational wise the same.
Yeah.
We were all second generations,
Yeah.
and we used to refer to ourselves as not as Americans. We used to refer to ourselves as you're Chinese, you're Japanese, you're Italian, you know, and the other people who had the nicer neighborhoods, they were the Americans. We weren't the Americans.
Do you feel like you grew up with your Chinese culture still embraced in your household, and
Oh yes,
traditions that you brought into your family?
we were a mixture. We were a mixture of the old culture and the American culture. And the American culture was whatever they were able to glean off of from public school and the newspapers. And so we weren't entirely American and we weren't entirely Asian. We were just a subculture of our own. And we were halfway in between.
And did that make you feel connected to both or connected to neither? How?
We didn't pay any attention
Yeah.
to it. We just grew up. And to give you an example, some of the Chinese families, their parents still worship the ancestors, and they would have incense, and during a certain time of the year, they would have a Buddhist monk, a Buddhist statue in there, but their kids went to church. So
Blending.
So the old folks practiced the Buddhist religion, and the kids practiced the Christian religion, and everyone got married in the Christian church, and our social activities for the young people was all in the churches. There were three churches: the Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational Church, and we all grew up centered on those three churches. While the parents had their own life worshiping their ancestors.
I got the sense in a part of your book that for you as a young child, the celebrations, the holidays.
Oh my gosh!
What?
We had we had 6 children. Okay, we practiced all the American holidays, all the Chinese holidays, and all the birthdays. So every month there was a dinner. It was a special dinner, a special party. Every month.
And I learned that your father was a really good cook.
Right.
So you looked forward to the meals that he made?
Right. And he would cook some special dinner and he would tell us about it. And we didn't pay attention. We weren't interested. We just liked the cooking.
Yeah.
So we just ate the food. So he was the only one that had any special affinity to what that holiday was. But the rest of us we just gobble up the good food.
And did any of those recipes eventually, did you start paying attention to any of them? Did you learn any of them to?
Oh, I wish I did.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah. The only one I know is watercress. He took watercress and he would boil with a pig liver, and then cook it to the vegetable was just it was no more. Everything was in the broth, and he would cook that right around the autumn, around October, because he said that would build up our immunity for change from summer to winter, and we wouldn't get sick. And he did a lot of that. Certain times of the year, he would cook certain vegetables to build up our immunity. But it's too bad we didn't learn them.
And it sounds like they were healthy, but also delicious.
What was that?
They were also delicious in
Oh,
addition to
yes.
being healthy.
That was all we were interested in.
Yeah.
It tastes good.
Did you have friends who knew that your father was a good cook? Was there ever any sharing of foods between
Oh,
cultures
yes.
and households?
Oh, see, when we were growing up, dim sum was something that just the Chinese people knew about. And the restaurant would have it for those who were able to afford to buy it. But in our neighborhood, the mothers made it, and it was better than what you have today. And they would share with each other. And this mother makes something, and she'll bring some to this house, and then we'll just share the different dim sums that they made.
Sounds delicious.
Right.
Wow. Okay, I'm very intrigued as to what brought you to Carpinteria, Rodney.
Oh, I had decided to, back in 1980, 89, we had this downturn on the economy, and at that time I was at the peak of my career, and I was building 14 high-end homes in Lancaster, and I was also building a apartment complex on 3 acres of 5 buildings, and it was supposed to be the apartment house I was going to build was going to be the last project I'll have in which I'll live on. And I was going to do that for cash, which all the money would have come from the 14 houses. And we took a downturn. We completed that subdivision. We didn't build the houses because the crash came and there were no buyers. And throughout the Antelope Valley and the Santa Clarita Valley, we had contractors that abandoned projects, and so we lost the fortune, and so and that was the same time I was going to build the house over here. We were going to build a 600 square feet house here, and that's the plans over there. And we dropped everything, and that was the year also. Well, just before then, we saw it coming. Just before then, I had decided to retire. I was 60 years old, and I had a house in Westwood. It was a 4,000 square feet house, And Westwood was changing, and so we wanted to leave, and we were looking for a place to move to. So we came out here, and I almost bought on top of Rincon, and it was showing there they were just building the water pipe into Rincon at that time, and then we came here and found this piece of property, and the fellows said they were looking for someone to buy this property for a couple of years, and they couldn't. We saw it, we said we'll take it, and so that's how we moved. We bought this, but then a little bit later, the downturn came, and so we lost everything except for this property. And so that's why we came here.
And at what point did you decide that apples would be
Oh,
your future?
well, we had this piece of land here, and I wanted to keep busy, and that's where I went to Oxnard to sell real estate. And this is how I met my friend Patterson. And I always like to talk about it. I went to work in his office, and we became close buddies. It's amazing. But anyway, while I was selling real estate there, we said, well, what are we going to do with all this land here? So we started to look around, and I said, I don't want to do what anyone else did. I don't want to grow cherimoyas. I don't want to grow avocados. So I saw a couple of apple trees in people's backyard. I said, we'll grow apples. And people said, you can't grow apples here. I said, well, I see them in the backyards. So I went to the farm industry conventions, and I met this fellow from this one nursery that grows that supplies all the farmers. And I said, would you sell me 70 trees? And he says, of course we will. I said, well, okay, then give me some apple trees. I didn't know anything about apples. So he said, well, you want to have so many chill hours? And they said, we got just the apples for you, Gala apples and Fuji apples. I said, okay. So I planted Fuji and Gala here, and they ended up with about 300 or 400 of them out here.
Wow.
And now I got about maybe 100 to 200 left. And then I planted the plum trees. And I planted all of them by myself.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I just did it in the weekends, and while I sold real estate in Oxnard.
Wow.
And then I tried to join Farmers Market. And I met Sam, who's the manager. And so Sam let me in, and I've been with them since.
So I know that there was a time that you spent in the Army, Rodney, and I want to know more about that and how it fell
Okay.
in your timeline.
Well, when I got called in the Army in 1954, and because I already had a bachelor's degree and was very heavy into physical chemistry. It was really petroleum reservoir engineering, but very heavy in physical chemistry. And when we went in and we had to take all sorts of tests to find out where everyone would fit, and I thought I was going to be in the infantry, and I was trying my best not to. And I thought, well, I could speak a little Chinese. Maybe I can be an interpreter. Well, I found out that my Chinese is terrible. And it's not only that, it comes from the backwoods. And it's like a typical American coming from the Ozarks.
Oh, wow.
And so I flunked that. And then the interviewer asked me one day, he says, well, you scored enough where you could be a candidate for officer training school. And I said, no, I don't want to be an officer. He says, why? I said, well, I'm not going to be like Teddy Roosevelt, and I'm not going to lead a charge of San Juan Hill. I'm going to be the last guy running up that hill. And so I said, well, if that case, you have to sign something that says you are offered that opportunity. I said, you darn right I would. So I signed it, and right the next day, they were giving us an assignment. And they said, you're going to be into a special unit that does research work. And I said, I signed away an opportunity to be an officer, and now I found out I'm in a non-combative unit. So anyway, I became a soldier scientist, and I didn't have to do basic training like everyone else. I only spent long enough to get my uniform, get my assignment, and then we did research work, and it was top secret work. And for the first couple months, they sent us all over the country in a train because they didn't know where to put us. There was only 50 of us throughout the entire United States at that one time that got this assignment. And so we were traveling from one state after another, and we didn't know what we were going to do. And even when top secret clearance came through, we were told we were going to Baltimore. And even when we got to Baltimore, we didn't know. And so later on, I found out that it was we were sent to do research work in chemical warfare, and I figured it out that it was part of the counterintelligence to keep the other side from using toxic weapons against our troops, because we were doing the research work and being ready to retaliate if they did it to us. So it was a counterintelligence effort. But it was our end of it was to refine to do the research work on it and refine the production of it, and to be able to if they would, the war was going on in Korea, and if they had done any of the chemical warfare against our troops, we would be in production right at that moment. And so it didn't happen. And that's how we were able to.
And so where were you, I'm sorry if I missed this, but where were you stationed, or where was the research being conducted?
I was stationed mostly in the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
And it was called the Army Chemical Center, and the original name is the Edgewood Arsenal, and Aberdeen Proving Grounds was right there, and also the CIA was also not too far from there.
And this seems like the kind of era in a young man's life that maybe he's eventually meeting his wife.
I can't hear you.
Is this an era that you eventually met your wife during this period?
No, I met my wife going to college, and it was Friday evening, and we were looking for something to do, and we heard about, and we were looking for, whoa, a bunch of guys looking for some girls to have fun with. And we heard that UCLA Chinese group had a house party, so we crashed it. And that's how I met my wife.
She was at that party.
Yeah.
Wow. Good thing you crashed it.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, when you decided at age 90 that you were going to start writing down your stories, what was that process like for you? Did you say, I'm going to spend an hour every day at my desk writing? Did you just sit down and not get up again until you were done with a book?
It was like an obsession, really.
Yeah.
Because I really wanted something to counter all the political things that's going on, and I thought that our country was going, we were going downhill, fighting against each other, and somebody had to get up and say something good, and I said, well, I'm going to be one of them, and so it was always on my mind, and for a while I wasn't too sure how I was going to do it, and I would get these ideas 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll wake up and it'll come to my head, and then I'll jump out of bed and run right to the computer and write it down as soon as before I forget it.
Yeah.
And then it was a whole, well, it was just ideas that came to my mind every morning, and then just writing and rewriting and finally putting it together so that I didn't go in all different directions. I was focused on one theme.
Yeah.
And my theme was, we can get along together. And we can get along together if we didn't concentrate on our differences.
Right.
So forget about our political difference, forget about our educational level, our racial difference, forget about that. Let's talk about what we have in common. And we could be friends better that way. And also, don't come to judgment on someone so fast. And I came to that conclusion after thinking about the Watts riot. I have that in my book because I was there when the Watts riot occurred. I was only about a mile from there, and I wrote how I felt when I saw the smoke coming up, and the next day when I went to work, I had the same thoughts that everyone else had. Those people must be crazy. They're turned on their own things. They're turned on their own economy, and I wouldn't do that. And we were criticizing them. And then when I went to the office, I met a couple of the black fellows who were working there, and they started telling me that one of the things they told me, this is we don't want to have you laugh at our jokes. We want you to laugh with us. And so it dawned on me that what they wanted to be was they wanted to be accepted.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted. They wanted to be part of the family. And they didn't want to be that you're here and I'm here living in the same area. We're one big family. It's just like a child wanted his mother's love. And so that dawned on me. And so my conclusion of that one chapter that I wrote down there was that let's not judge them by what they did. Let's judge them by finding out what caused them to do it. What is their inner feelings? Why did they do it? And so we could understand them with how if you're going to solve a problem, if you didn't know why it happened.
Sure. So when you put these books in people's hands, in many ways it's
Right.
in your mind kind of instructional.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a learning event for me also as I was writing, because I didn't come to this conclusion until I came near the end of that chapter of Watts Riot. That's when I came to that conclusion. It was a learning event for myself.
Right. So in the writing, you're able to process your ideas.
Right. Because I was just as guilty as the other person when we saw the Watts Riot.
Sure.
We were all thinking the same way.
Sure. When you look back on your 95 years, is it 95?
I'll be 95 in next May, this coming May.
Okay, so 94 and 11/12ths.
Right. Right.
When you look back on those, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
Well, what I'm most proud of?
Yeah.
Well, I never gave that any thought, really. I guess the thing that I could be the most proud of is I'm not the same person I was growing up. I always say that would be because one of the things I'm very highly critical of someone. I know they didn't mean it that way, but they would say, I had such a wonderful life that I would never change. I would never live it. I would live it exactly the way I grew up in. And you know what that tells me? He hasn't learned a thing. So I would say the thing I'm the most proud of is I'm a different person.
That's a pretty great takeaway now that I understand it better.
Right.
All right. I think anyone who talks to somebody who's 94 and 11/12 has to ask the question, what's the secret to all of your health and your longevity?
It's when my mother was carrying me, she must have been very healthy. So if you're a lady and you're pregnant, don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, and take care of the child until the child is born.
That's pretty good advice, I'd say.
Right.
So the next chapter for Rodney will be at Wood Glen in
Right.
Santa Barbara, and tell us what kind of plans you have for that chapter.
I've already approached the program manager over there. Her name is Michelle, and what I want to do is I'm going to get a group of people, and I'm not going to say I'm going to make authors out of you. I'm going to say, wouldn't you like to tell your grandchildren something about your childhood days, your happy days, the happiest time of your time, like what happened on your very first date when you were in high school, or something like that, and put that together and make it as a Christmas present for your grandchildren. So I'm going to organize a group of people there to write, and I'm going to get them to write about the happy days when they were a child.
That's so wonderful.
And then make it into a little it'll be something you just put it in a regular coffee shop with a little see-through folder, and it'd be a nice Christmas present for your grandchild. So this is how I grew up when I was your age. This is what we did.
I have to tell you, Rodney, that it's really inspiring to talk to somebody who's
Right.
almost 95 and has ambitious plans for your future.
And I'm going to get them to not only write, I'm going to get them to read what they write,
Yeah,
so we can critique them
yeah,
and help them smooth out their whatever they're writing, because when you write, and you have a tendency to write like you talk, and you go off in different tangents.
yeah.
But you can't do that when you're doing the writing, because the reader couldn't focus on what you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So if we critique each other,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll have a nice little present for to hand down to the grandchildren.
Did you learn those lessons about writing on your own, or did you work with somebody who
No,
helped to keep you on track?
I had to learn how to write,
Wow.
because I was writing like the way I talk, and when you talk, as soon as thing comes to your mind, you go off on a tangent,
Yeah.
and you always wonder, well, how come this person misunderstood me? And the old saying is this: I know what you heard me what I said, but that's not what I said, and that's because you keep changing as your thoughts came in, and your listener loses the focus, and you can't do that in writing.
Yeah, but that's a hard thing to start to understand without, someone
Right.
offering you guidance. It sounds like you really were able to, you said you wrote and you rewrote, and through that process you understood that on your own.
Well, not only that, what I've learned about writing, it's just like preparing a stage play. It's really just like it because when you get a stage play, you have all the background scenery that helps tell the story. But the difference between that and writing is that the writing has to describe it so that the reader has the entire picture of what you're trying to say. But at the same time, you mustn't make it so much going in different directions that he loses the focus. So it has to blend in together. So it's quite a skill, really.
I very much like that analogy.
Yeah. It's really like a stage play.
Yeah, I see that.
Like a two-person on a stage having a play.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thanks. I think we probably have lots of. All right. I feel like we've had such a lovely conversation, and I'm so again pleased and appreciative that you opened your home to us. And thank you for your books. Maybe you want to tell people before we're done how and where they can find your books.
I can't hear you.
How can people who want to purchase your books, how can they find them?
Oh, Chaucer's.
Chaucer's
bookstore.
in Santa Barbara.
Right.
Great. And they are, the first one that Rodney wrote was American as Apple Pie.
Right.
And the second is Stories of the Good Old Days.
Right.
And they are available at Chaucer's.
And Chaucer's bookstore, right.
Wonderful.
And they could also buy it through the internet.
And also through the internet. Okay.
But
fantastic.
But if they could, I would rather they go to Chaucer's because it supports a local.
So Rodney's first choice is for you to go to Chaucer's and purchase his book.
Right.
And if they're all sold out because so many of you have rushed to Chaucer's to buy them, then maybe you can find it on the internet.
Right.
Rodney, do you have any other items you want to share with us before we sign off?
I just hope I wasn't too choppy in what I was saying, but it was a great honor, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And if you and I were both choppy at times, we have Larry to help us.
Okay.
I'll choppy.